Welcome back to another episode of Gaming Origins, the series where we look at the origins and history of various topics in gaming. Today we're moving away from platformers and looking at one of my favourite JRPG series ever, Persona, a series that some of you may be surprised to know is actually now a little over 20 years old. The Persona series is a spin-off of the Shin Megami Tensei series and primarily developed by Atlus. The first game, Revelations Persona, began development not long after the release of Shin Megami Tensei If, which featured a story revolving around high school kids in a high school setting. This setting was positively received, and thus they decided to create the Persona sub-series to continue this setting for future games. When discussing the games, I will do my best to avoid delving too much into the plots as to avoid spoiling them, as I know how story heavy these games are. Revelations Persona launched originally on the PS1 in 1996 and only in Japan and the US, missing a European release. The story begins with a group of teenagers playing a parlor game aptly named Persona, which after seeing a ghost-like figure, the protagonist is pulled into the realm of Filemon and in turn granted the power of a persona. It doesn't take long before your hometown is invaded by demons, and therefore you along with your school friends will defend your home with your newfound powers. The game uses various different perspectives depending on what you're doing in the game. For example, moving around the hometown will use an overhead perspective, whereas in dungeons you'll play in a first person view. Revelations Persona scored reasonably critically well with a Metacritic of 78%. The game was later ported to the PSP in 2009, finally hitting Europe as well, this time known simply as Shin Megami Tensei Persona, dropping Revelations from the title. The port was completely relocalized along with new cutscenes and a better menu that improved the whole experience greatly. Development of a sequel began promptly after the first game's success. Persona 2 released 3 years later in 1999, however released only in Japan. This is believed to be due to concerns that the game wouldn't be received well in the West due to not understanding many of the references to Japanese culture and over controversial material like Nazi symbols and even Adolf Hitler appearing in the game. Innocent Sin follows Tetsuya and a new cast of high schoolers who join your team against new antagonists that threaten the world, one of which is known as the Joker. In short, the cast play a game that is said to be able to summon the Joker, who in turn can make your dreams come true or steal them from you, and things don't exactly go well. Later, the characters realise that rumours being made up in the world are becoming true, which also ties into a new game mechanic in the game where you can create your own rumours that can benefit you. You no longer navigate dungeons in a first person view like the first game, instead in third person, something that's remained in every subsequent mainline title since. Battles also don't take place on a grid system, meaning you don't have to worry about your character's positioning in regards to your attacks on enemies. Like the first game, Innocent Sin also received a PSP port in 2011 and finally made it across to the West. The port had new character portraits, an overhauled battle system and improved controls. In the port, Hitler's name is changed to Führer and wears sunglasses. A sequel to Innocent Sin, Eternal Punishment, released in 2000 in both Japan and the US, but never officially made its way to Europe even until this day. The game follows on from the last with you taking control of Maya, one of the party members from Innocent Sin, instead of Tetsuya, although he still makes an appearance, as do all the characters in some form or another. The localization was handled much better this time around and was much more faithful to the Japanese version, although some of the localized name changes from the last game had to be kept for continuity. The game was positively received and scored a decent 83% on Metacritic. Once again, a PSP port was released, but strangely it didn't come out anywhere outside of Japan. Next is Persona 3, the first game in the series to grace the PS2, releasing originally in 2006 in Japan, a year later in the US, and finally 2008 for those of us in Europe. Persona 3 combines traditional RPG and life sim and is your task as a player to juggle these two elements, leveling up your bonds with various characters in the real world and battling shadows during the Dark Hour, a period of time that exists during each day. During the Dark Hour, a tower appears called Tartarus that takes the place of your high school where your protagonist of the game attends, which acts as a dungeon of the game and where you'll do your battling. Persona 3 feels quite different to the previous entries, but in my opinion absolutely for the better. The one negative aspect of the game in comparison to the later titles is that Tartarus can feel rather tedious over time and very samey, but the social link aspect added was a very welcome addition. Persona 3 scored a very respectable 86% and laid the foundation of the Persona games we know today. In 2007, Persona 3 FES was released in Japan as well as other regions later. FES was a version of the game with updates to the original game, as well as including a new epilogue called The Answer, which adds another 30 hours to the game after the ending of the base game and also allows you to control the character Aegis. Changes to the original include additional personas, social link modifications, new quest, costumes, a hard mode and an overhaul to Naganaki Shrine. FES scores slightly higher than the original game with a score of 89%, praised for the sheer amount of content available. 2008 saw the release of one of the best Persona games to date. The game released towards the very end of the PS2's life cycle and after the PS3 had already been released. The game follows a new protagonist who moves to a small location known as Inaba, a rural town that Atlus purposely chose as a contrast to the bustling city locations of previous titles. The story begins with mysterious murders happening in Inaba, which you learn has a connection to the victims appearing on a strange TV channel called the Midnight Channel just before their deaths. The protagonist and his classmates learn through certain events that they have the ability to enter a new world through the Midnight Channel and aim to find out who or what is behind the murders. Dungeons this time are far more varied with set themes and distinct looks compared to 3, making them feel much less monotonous, fixing one of the biggest criticisms of the last game. Social links make a welcome return with a variety of new, different characters to bond with. The soundtrack and general art style are once again top notch, only really arguably beaten by the recent Persona 5. Persona 4 scored a fantastic 90% and solidified itself as a fan favourite in the series. Persona 3 got yet another version in the form of a PSP port in 2009, known simply as Persona 3 Portable. Due to hardware limitations in comparison to the PS2, there were a number of compromises, such as no longer being able to actively run around outside of dungeons, instead using menus purely to navigate. Persona 3 Portable does interestingly have some additions over the home console versions though. The biggest addition is in the form of a new choice of girl protagonist, which opens up completely new social links or alters current ones. You now have the ability to control all your party members in battle separately, as opposed to just their protagonist, which many fans saw as a very welcomed addition. A new easy mode and hard mode were introduced also in the form of beginner and maniac. Persona 3 Portable was seen as a successful port, scoring 89% on Metacritic, that despite some compromises, the addition it did add were genuinely really good. Much like Persona 3, Persona 4 also got an additional version, this time known as Persona 4 Golden, that released in 2012 for the PlayStation Vita. Golden is arguably one of, if not the best reason to own a Vita still to date, and an incredible port. Golden isn't just a simple port of Persona 4 and a handheld, but also contains a lot of new features, making it the best version of the game to play. Some of the most notable ones include 2 new social links that in turn add new scenes and new dungeons, a new epilogue to the true ending, additional events, the ability to go outside at night, as well as additional difficulty levels to name just a few. The voice actors for Teddy and Chie were changed, which at least in the case of the voice actor for Chie was because she retired from acting. I personally think the new voices are great, however some, especially those used to the originals, had mixed opinions on the new ones, but this was a minor grievance at most. Persona 4 Golden is a fantastic game, and I urge anyone who has a Vita to make sure you play this entry. The game scored a very high 93% on Metacritic, a little higher than the original game. Persona 4 Arena was the beginning of a number of spin-off titles. The game released in 2012 for the PS3 and Xbox 360, the first time any form of Persona game had released on an Xbox console. The game is nothing like previous JRPG titles, instead a 2D fighting game. Atlus wanted fans to play a game based on the series outside of an RPG, and approached Arc System Works, who are known for their work on the Blaze Blue games, who accepted their request to make the game, with Atlus contributing to its development. Despite being a spin-off and completely different genre of game, the story does indeed follow on from the ending of Persona 4, but before the epilogue of Persona 4 Golden. There are 12 different story modes to play through, each showing the story through the eyes of a different character. Many of the main characters from Persona 4 are playable fighters, as are many from Persona 3 who are interwoven into the story campaign. In spite of a move to a completely new genre, the game scored very well with an average of 85% on Metacritic across the 2 console releases. In 2014, the first Nintendo 3DS Persona game released. Persona Q Shadow of the Labyrinth is a JRPG that's considered non-canon and a spin-off. Much like Persona 4, it blends the cast of Persona 3 and 4 together, giving the player the choice to control the protagonist of either of the games at the beginning. The characters are designed in more of a chibi style, and the gameplay is a mix of your standard Persona game and Etrian Odyssey. All party members can freely change their persona, which is explained in the plot and allows players to diversify their party. Persona Q was positively received with a score of 83%. A year after Arena released and not long after Persona Q, we got another fighting Persona game called Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, also known under the long-winded title in Japan, Persona 4 The Ultimax Ultra Suplex Hold. 8 new playable characters were included over the last game from 3 and 4, as well as an entirely new character, Sho, who acts as the main antagonist. The story is split into 2 campaigns, one that focuses on the Persona 4 characters and the other on the Persona 3 characters. Gameplay was more balanced, returning characters had more moves, a new S-hold system was introduced, and shadow types for a lot of characters were added who differed slightly from their normal counterparts, being more risk but with the potential of greater reward. Ultimax scored very similarly to Arena with 84%. Once again, Persona diverges into another new genre, this time a rhythm game that worked remarkably well. Persona 4 Dancing All Night released at the end of 2015 and is the second and last game to release on the PlayStation Vita. Amazingly, Atlus managed to create a story revolving around the rhythm game, taking place after the epilogue of Golden. Instead of the Midnight Channel, the characters are sucked into a place called the Midnight Stage, a new separate place to the TV world from 4. They use the power of song and dance to save pop idols from the shadows in the Midnight Stage. The story is cheesy and a little silly, but I can't imagine it was easy to create a story around a rhythm-based game, but it works well enough to drive the campaign forward. As you'd expect, the game features a lot of different well-known Persona tracks, as well as many of the characters to choose from. You unlock clothing items by playing the game, which in turn you can outfit the characters with. Dancing All Night scored 76% overall with mainly positive reviews, noting how it's easy to play but also hard to master. Finally, we're on to the latest in the series, Persona 5 that released on PS3 and PS4. P5 released only a few months ago in April of this year, although it was originally slated for a 2014 holiday release date. The game is arguably the best game in the series to date, selling incredibly well in the West for what was a niche Japanese RPG, introducing the series to many new fans. P5 is the first time the core series has been in HD outside of the fighting games on console and looks really good, especially on the PS4. Its art style and animation really stand out, not just in the gameplay, but even in its menus. Plot-wise, our protagonist is transferred to Shujin Academy after being put on probation for getting in trouble with the law. He, along with another, stumble upon the palace and inside discover the ability to control personas, eventually forming a group known as the Phantom Thieves with other classmates he meets along the way as they tackle various foes. Much like 3 and 4, you juggle your daily social life along your battles in the palace, building social links or confidants as they are known in Persona 5 with different characters, and also increasing your stats like intelligence, courage among others, all of which will have various benefits and open new opportunities. When it comes to battles, they play out similar to previous titles, but one element they brought back is demon negotiations from the initial first games, which allows you to get different rewards based on what you say, like items or money. Persona 5 was critically well received with an average of 93% overall and is considered one of the best games so far this year. That's it for today. I hope you liked the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and sub, and follow Project Gamer on Twitter for channel updates. Let me know in the comments what series you'd like me to cover in the future also. Click the thumbnail on the left for the last episode of Gaming Origins on Spyro the Dragon, or the one on the right for another of my videos. Thanks for watching as usual, and I'll see you on the next video.